Shabbos Daf Pei Aleph begins with a Mishnah, which again lists a number of materials and describes the minimum amount of each material which is significant enough that one would be in violation of the Issa of carrying, should he carry that amount to a different Rishus or in the Rishus Harabim. The Gemara will comment on a number of those items, and then the Gemara will branch into a lengthy discussion about the use of the bathroom and the proper manner of cleaning oneself after that. So first of all, let's see the Mishnah. The Mishnah lists a few things. So first of all, an etzem, which is a bone. There are a number of things which are made out of that material. The smallest useful one is a measuring spoon. That's a Tanna Kama's opinion. Rabbi Yehuda says it could be used to make a lock. Now, the Gemara at this point assumes that he means the entire lock, even though the word that he uses is the teeth of the lock. Okay, next item on the list is glass, which is enough to use as a sharp edge to scrape the head of a stick that weavers used to use to separate their threads. Next on the list is a rock, and here we have a machlokes. Tanna Kama says it has to be large enough to throw at a bird. That's the smallest thing you could do with a rock to scare away a bird. Or Elazar ben Yaakov says you don't need to throw a rock to scare away a bird. You could just shout at it. It has to be big enough to actually scare away an entire animal. Okay, so the Gemara begins by discussing the lock that you make out of the bone, and the Gemara first of all says here you have two opinions as to what the smallest use out of a bone is, either a measuring spoon or a lock. Spoons are certainly smaller than locks, but we know that Rabbi Yehuda is supposed to have the smaller shear, and here Rabbi Yehuda says the lock, that's the bigger shear. So what's going on? So the Gemara says Rabbi Yehuda didn't mean the entire lock. He meant the teeth of the lock. The lock was comprised of a series of teeth which locked together, and they were held in place, and he's referring to one of the teeth of that lock you can make from a bone. Okay, now the Gemara has the brisa about locks made from bones. The Gemara says there are three possible stages of lock production. If you make the teeth, they are not mekabel tumah yet. In order for something to be mekabel tumah, it has to be a complete finished object. The teeth are functionless until they're put into the lock. Once you put them in the lock, then it's complete. It is mekabel tumah. But that's only if you're planning to use the lock on a chest or something. If, however, you're planning to attach it to a door, which is fixed into the wall, which is fixed into the ground, so once you do that and you fix it into the wall, it becomes attached to the ground, and the rule is that nothing that's attached to the ground is ever mekabel tumah, and therefore it goes back to being not mekabel tumah anymore. Okay, back to our discussion of the Mishnah. We had glass. Glass is on the list. So the Gemara says the minimum size for glass does not necessarily have to be a sharp edge, which is enough to scrape the stick. There's a brisa that gives a different shear, and that is enough to cut two threads from the loom in one shot. The Gemara now moves on to the topic of stones and their minimum sizes. This will bring us to a discussion of the minimum sizes of stones that are allowed to be brought into the bathroom to wipe oneself. That'll go on for a while, and will also bring us to a discussion of other materials which may be used to wipe oneself in the bathroom, such as a stone that has already been used, or a pottery shard, or a stone with grass growing on it, and then a potential issue of witchcraft, which may be performed with such stones. Along the way, we'll have a bit of a discussion of removing a flower pot from the ground that's related to the stone with grass growing on it being removed from the ground. Okay, so first of all, the Gemara says we had seen in the Mishnah machlokes between Elazar ben Yaakov and Tanna Kama as to what size the stone is, whether it's to throw at a bird and scare it, or throw at an animal and scare it. The Gemara says that Rabbi Yaakov says, named Rabbi Yochanan, throwing it at a stone at an animal has to be big enough to actually make the animal feel it, not just to startle it. And how big is it? There's a brisa that says it's got at least the size of 10 azuzim. Okay, now we go to the minimum size stones to be used for the bathroom. There are two issues here. First of all, stones are muktzah. But Chazal allowed one to bring stones into the restroom with him because he needs to clean himself with it. It's an issue of kavod habrios, of human dignity, and therefore an Issa D'Rabbanan is not forbidden in a situation of human dignity, and one is allowed to bring muktzah objects with him. However, he's only allowed to bring the amount that he needs to clean himself. So we need to know how many stones and what size stones does he need to clean himself after using the restroom. Those would be the amount he's allowed to bring, and not more. Additionally, this also defines how many of these types of stones are useful, so that if you carry them in Rishus Harabim, one is violating the Issa D'Oraisa of carrying. It's a different type of stone than the stones you throw at animals. You wouldn't throw these at animals, and therefore the previous shear that we saw in the Mishnah is not relevant. So the Gemara says that zonin came into the yeshiva and he said, what is the size of stones that's used for the bathroom? We need it for these two halachas. You're allowed to carry them inside of Rishos HaYachid. It's not a problem of muktzah, and if you carry them in Rishos HaRabim, it's an Isser D'Oraisa. So, Gemara has three sizes here and a couple of different versions about how these three sizes are organized. First of all, we have a machlokes. They told him then in the yeshiva, they said that there are three stones that are used in the following order. First, use a small one the size of an olive that cleans away the initial material. Then use a slightly larger one the size of a nut, and then the third one the size of an egg. So he said, what do you mean? I'm supposed to weigh each one and see what the size is? So they discussed it a while, and then they came up with, you know what, you're allowed to bring a handful of stones. You don't have to specifically use the exact order. Now, the Gemara has a brisa that has this very discussion. The Gemara has Rabbi Yossi says, what are the sizes of stones? Three. It's three. The size of an olive, a nut, and an egg. And Ben Rabbi Yossi says the name of his father, no, it's a handful of stones. Now we have another brisa, also similar. How many stones, what type of stones you're allowed to bring? The Gemara has these three sizes, but here it's three different opinions. Rabbi Meir says the size of a nut, Rabbi Yehuda says the size of an egg, and Rabbi Meir says the size of a nut, Rabbi Yehuda says the size of an egg. Just those two. Okay. Now the Gemara has a comment on this machlokes. The Gemara says the Rav from Bar Papa says the same machlokes between a Meir and Rabbi Yehuda between an egg and a nut also applies to the size of an esrog. So the Gemara says, hold on a second. Discussion on the size of an esrog is a Mishnah. This is a brisa. You don't make the Mishnah dependent on the brisa. You make the brisa dependent on the Mishnah. So the Gemara corrects the statement. Yes, just like there's a dispute concerning there is a machlokes about the size of an esrog, the same machlokes applies to this stone. Okay, now the Gemara has a few halachas about what you're allowed to use to clean yourself with. The Gemara says you should not use clumps of earth, which are commonly found in Bavel, because they would fall apart and they don't do a good job. Next, Rava says you should not massage the area which needs to be cleaned. You should massage it before using the restroom in the event that one is constipated and he cannot relieve himself, so you may want to massage the area, so you can't massage it with a stone. During the week you're allowed to, because the problem is that you may cut off hairs from the area. As a matter of fact, you certainly will. So in Shabbos, you shouldn't because of those hairs. So the Gemara says, what do you mean? If he can't find a way to relieve himself, it's a sakana. It'll be hazardous to his health. So the Gemara says, no, he could massage himself, just not in the usual way. He has to do it with the shinoi, klachayat, so that it's only an Isser D'Rabbanan. And an Isser D'Rabbanan is permitted in a situation of kavod abrios, human dignity, and certainly for health. Okay. Now we continue the discussion about how many stones and what kind of stones you're allowed to bring into the restroom. The Gemara here has two different versions of how to understand this. In the Rishonim, we're going to go with Taisvus Pshat because it's easier. So we have as follows. Rabbi Yanai says that if you have a set place that's always used for relieving oneself, so you can bring in stones, you could leave some there. But if it's not set aside for this, you can't leave them there. You can't bring extra. You have to bring only the right amount. Now, what size? So you're only allowed to bring the size of the leg of a pestle used for grinding spices. Now, Shesha says you can use a bigger stone if the stone was already set aside for use as a bathroom stone. And how could you tell? Well, if it has markings on it that shows that it was used in the past, and obviously it's an official toilet stone, and therefore it's not muktzah anymore, and you're allowed to bring it into the restroom. We're referring to situations in which the issue was muktzah. Stones are generally muktzah, but if this one has already become a bathroom stone, then it's not a muktzah anymore, and therefore you don't have to worry about the size or how many you bring. So I think Gemara discusses this issue of using a stone that was used before. We're going to have a couple of different statements about this. Gemara says, first of all, Rav Shesha says that you can't use a stone that was used already. We have a brisa that says that there are 10 things that cause a disease of the lower area, possibly hemorrhoids, and these are the 10 things. Somebody eats leaves of reeds, leaves of grapevines, the crawlers of grapevines, ridged flesh of an animal without salt, the backbone of a fish, salted fish that wasn't cooked, sediment of wine. These are all things that one ingests that cause hemorrhoids. And now we have cleaning issues. Somebody who cleans himself with lime, with sid, or with a piece of pottery, or one who cleans himself with a stone that somebody else had used before. Now, those who say, additionally, that if one uses the restroom without sitting comfortably, he squats, so that stresses the intestines and that causes hemorrhoids as well. Anyway, what we see over here in this brisa was that you can't use a stone to clean yourself that somebody else has used already. Somewhere gives three answers that it's not a problem with what Rav Sheshes said, that you're allowed to use a stone that was used already. Either you're not allowed to use a one with fresh material on it, but if it's dried, you're allowed to. Or it's not a problem if you use the other side of the stone, or it's not a problem if you use your own stone again. If you use somebody else's, that's a problem, but your own is not a problem. Okay, now the Gemara has a question about this. Abaye says, what happens if it rained on it and it washed off those traces? Does that mean that it's still called a bathroom stone and you're allowed to use it? It's not muktzah? Or is it not a bathroom stone anymore and you have to only use the minimum size? So Gemara says, well, as long as the mark is still there, even if it's the material is actually washed off, that's okay. Okay, now the Gemara says, are you allowed to carry stones onto the roof if you plan to use the roof as a restroom? Apparently it was hard to find restrooms there, and sometimes you needed it in a rush. Chazal were very careful not to delay using the restroom, so one would go up to the roof. The question is, you're allowed to schlep stones up to the roof. It's an extra strain. You're allowed to do that. The Gemara says, yes, you're allowed to. It's covered up brios. It's a question of human dignity, and it even pushes away halachos. Okay, now the Gemara says, Marei Mar said over this halacha, and Ravina asked a kasha on that, about a brisa which says about using a toothpick. So you want to use a piece of wood to clean your teeth. It's also an issue of a covered habrios. To have a machlok is whether you're allowed to use a random piece of wood which is lying around and is muktzah because it's covered habrios, or you have to use one which is not a muktzah, such as one that is put in a animal's pen. So Gemara says, so now we have a problem, because you clearly see over here that according to Chachamim, you're only allowed to use wood which is not muktzah. But what happened to covered habrios? Covered habrios is not enough of an issue to make muktzah not a problem. You just said you're allowed to bring stones up to the roof for that purpose. So Gemara says, that's different. When it comes to cleaning your teeth, you know where you're going to eat your meal. You should have set aside the toothpicks there before. It's your own problem. As far as the restroom, you can't predict where you'll be and when you'll need it, and if somebody else will be in one. So it's not a complaint against you. It's not your own fault for not preparing stones in advance before Shabbos. Okay, now the Gemara goes into a slightly different discussion over here. It's about using the restroom in a freshly plowed field. So Rav Huna says you should not relieve yourself in a freshly plowed field on Shabbos. So the Gemara says, why not? If the problem is you're going to step on the plowing and you're going to ruin the plowing, so that's not a Shabbos problem, that's even during the week. Maybe you're afraid that there'll be grasses growing on the stone that you will use, and you'll end up tearing some of the grasses off. So the Gemara says that can be a problem because Rish Lakish has said that it's called a davar she'ein miskaven. It's not what you intended to do. You didn't intend to rip the grasses off, and therefore it's not an isser. It's not a psik reisha either, so it's not an issue. So it's not a problem. So Gemara says the issue is as follows. The issue is that you may take your stone to clean yourself from the top of the ridge of where the plowed up earth is and end up putting it back into the bottom of the plowed area. That means that you're filling in the plowed spot at least a little bit with the rock that you used. That's forbidden because if you do that outside, it's considered to be planting or plowing. You are helping to prepare the field for growing vegetables, so that you wouldn't be able to do. Okay, now we had just learned that Rish Lakish said that you're allowed to clean yourself with the stone with grass on it. No, I mean it's not a problem of picking off the grass because it's not for sure going to happen. So Gemara says so. Based on this, you can say the following halacha: if you have a flower pot that's growing that is on the ground, and the flower pot has holes in it, so the plants in the flower pot are considered to be connected to the ground. But if you pick it up, it's not a problem. It's not considered like you detached the plants from the ground that it was growing on because it was in a flower pot. How do I know that? Because Rish Lakish said you're allowed to take the stone and use it to clean oneself, even though the stone has grass growing on it. Aha, that's just like the flower pot. You are disconnecting the growing plant from the ground, even though it is still connected to the stone that it's growing on. Just like the flower pot, where you have plants growing in the flower pot, you're allowed to disconnect them from the ground. So the Gemara says, Rav Kahana says that's not necessarily true. Using the stone is very necessary, it's important. Just to move a flower pot, you don't have to do that. Okay, Abaye says, once we're on the subject of removing a flower pot from the ground, I'm going to say a halacha here. If you have a flower pot that's not attached to the ground, it's not connected to the ground, it's held up on legs, and you put it flat on the ground, that is an issur of planting, because now it draws nutrients from the ground. And if it's on the ground and you take it off the ground, you lift it up, then you are tayleish, you are detaching from the ground, and that's an issur d'oraisa as well. Okay. Now we go back to the subject of what you are and are not allowed to use for cleaning oneself after using the restroom. So the Gemara says, Rav Yochanan says you should not use a piece of pottery, piece of cheres, on Shabbos. And the Gemara is going to have the same question. Why not? So the Gemara first says, maybe the problem is that you might cut yourself. That doesn't make sense. It's not a Shabbos issue. It should be an issue during the week as well. Maybe the problem is because somebody will find it, and if he finds a shard of pottery that you used to clean yourself with, he can perform witchcraft on you. He can do a kishuf. But that's not true, because that's also not a Shabbos issue. So Gemara says the reason is we're afraid you're going to cut hairs near the area. So the Gemara says that can't be either, because that's not a psikresha and it's enem miskaveh. So what's the problem? So Gemara says Rav Nasan bar Oshia said to the Chachamim, this was said by Rav Yochanan, and he's a very chashuv person, therefore we have to try to understand this. So the reason must be as follows. He said that you shouldn't use a pottery shard on Shabbos. He meant to say that you shouldn't use a pottery shard, you shouldn't use even a pottery shard on a Shabbos. You may have thought that a pottery shard is better to use on Shabbos, because it's not muktzah. A stone is muktzah on Shabbos. You have to come on to all kinds of excuses that it's covered a brius. But if it's a shard, so it's not muktzah, it's functional, it has a purpose. So you may think you should use that. So he says, no, that is not any better to use on Shabbos than anything else, and you will still only be allowed to bring the minimum amount. What he means to say is that you shouldn't use the shard at all. You shouldn't use it not on Shabbos and not during the week. Even though you may think it's better to use it on Shabbos, you shouldn't use it on Shabbos. And the reason is because you may cut yourself, or somebody may perform kishuf on you. Now, Rava tries an alternate explanation over here. He says maybe the reason really is because you may remove hairs. That's how he understood Rav Yochanan. And he asked, but you can't say the reason is because of hairs, because Rav Yochanan holds that pulling out hairs unintentionally is called enem miskaveh, and it's not usher. As a matter of fact, we see that halacha in the case of a nazir. A nazir is not allowed to cut or remove hairs. But Rav Yochanan quoted a stam in Mishnah who says that he's allowed to rub his hair and disentangle his hair, even though it may pull out hairs because it's not a psikresha. Combing his hair, that he's not allowed to do. That's a psikresha. So you see that Rav Yochanan holds that if it's not for sure going to pull out hairs, it's not a problem. So how come using this piece of pottery is a problem? So Gemara says, therefore we have to stick with the other explanation that Rav Nasan bar Oshia, which we said before. Okay, now we conclude with a little story over here. The Gemara says, you just said that if somebody finds a piece of cheres that you used in the bathroom, he can perform witchcraft on you. The Gemara says, how do you know? So the Gemara says, it's a story of Chizah and Rav Huna were traveling on a boat, and some fancy lady, Matronisa, came and she said, I would like to travel with you, and they said no. So she was upset, and while they were sailing, she put a spell on them. She said some incantation, and the boat froze. It refused to move anymore. But the Chacham said something to counteract what she said, and that canceled what she did. It's not clear what they said over here. They wouldn't use a kishuf. There are some who say that they were allowed to use a kishuf to save themselves from her. Some who say that they said, whatever it is, they released the boat, and she was upset, and she said, listen, I would deal with you, but I can't do anything to you, because you're very careful on not doing three things which make a person susceptible to a kishuf. Those three things are: you do not clean yourself with a shard of pottery, you don't kill a louse when it's on your clothing, and you don't take out vegetables that are already tied up in a bundle by the gardener and eat them. Since you don't do these three things, there's nothing I can do to you. From here we see that somebody who does use a shard of cheres to clean himself after using the restroom will be susceptible to witchcraft.